So here's the thing about mother bears. Okay. They are very fierce, right? They're like an
Hmm.
apex predator, but they also seek and create safe and nurturing environments for their cubs. And they intentionally play with their cubs to activate powerful social skills and like life skills, like hunting and resting and all of those things. And so the term ferocity really came from, thinking about a mother bear and how she works with cubs is very much how many teachers, when they're really engaging in fierce pedagogy, they're doing similar work. They're ensuring that kids are entering their classroom space. Their classroom space is safe and it is nourishing. We know that without safety and without nurture, kids have a people have a
Yes.
very, very difficult time learning, right? So that's the foundation. And then you're also actively and intentionally creating opportunities for kids to learn the skills they need, not only to survive.
Today, I'm sitting down with Kass Minor, who elevates joy and justice taught fiercely. I have been looking forward to this conversation, and I think you're going to love it. Let's get into it. So, we are literacy people, and our first question
Mhm.
is, what are you currently reading, watching, or listening to?
Oh my goodness. So if you go to my bedside, I have like a tower. I have a tower of books. So I'll just throw out a couple of things I recently read. One of my favorite things that I picked up recently was a nonfiction book called The Gods of New York. And it's
Okay.
a history of New York during the 80s. So during the Koch mayoralship and the David Dinkins mayoralship. And so, as somebody who's lived here for like 25 years, but I didn't grow up here.
Mm-hmm.
It's just really fascinating. So that's my nonfiction read. And then my fiction read, I'll say, I'm reading Hamnet. So I'm sure you're
Okay.
maybe familiar with the film,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a
Yes.
speculative fiction about Shakespeare's life. And it's really interesting. And there's some like bubonic plague stuff in there. So it's sort of like tickling my brain in these really fun ways. And then my third thing I'll say,
Mm-hmm.
just from the research lens, because I'm a big believer that all us educators, stay plugged into the research atmosphere. I've been reading a lot of Michelle Fine's work about participatory action research.
Oh.
Um, with this idea that, no research about us without us. And so I've been thinking about, how we include more kids in our research work and especially more teachers in our research work as well.
Oh, I
So
love that.
that's my reading life.
I love you're so balanced.
I try, I have that book bag with me with all this different stuff.
Yes. Okay, I love that. So my next question is, how do you explain what you do for a living? Like, like you're in an airport or a coffee shop and someone's like, oh, when they see you with that book bag and they're like, what do you do? How do you explain your career?
That is such a great question because a lot of our kids' friends will ask them, like, what do your parents do? And they're like lost. Like they're just like, "Ugh, we don't really know." And so this is a great question. And I'm going to have them watch this after we are done. So, I tell people I'm an educator. I think that is like the easiest way
Mm.
to describe all of the different things that I do because, those of us who have been in education for a long time, you have like about 10 different pots cooking on the stove, right? So, I work with children. So I work with small circles of kids. We do all kinds of learning together. We do a lot of reading together. I do a lot of like how to create more small groups in our classroom spaces. And so that's some of my favorite work. But I also work like on a larger scale with really thinking about transforming like school culture. And so that work involves so many different groups of people, right? It's the teachers, it's the families, it's the school administration, it's district wide. And so
Mm-hmm.
that work is also really fun. But as you know, like that's not just like, teaching literacy, like print literacy, that is like social literacy, that's emotional literacy, that's like building our capacity for, what's going on, what has happened in the past, and how do we want our future to be, and what do we need to consider as we're building that together. So all that is to say, I think educator is like the most succinct way to describe what I do. I'm a teacher. I'm an educator.
I love though, like your joy and energy as you started describing what you do. I was like,
Yeah.
yes, you love this,
Yes.
and we love
Hmm.
that you love it.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's nothing like it. I haven't I went from working in the food industry in college. I was a waitress for a really, really long time, like from high school to the day I graduated college. And I remember like thinking about how much I use those skills, like, peopling and
Mm-hmm.
waitressing and organizing and prioritizing tasks. And it was so fun because you're just in the mix. Um, but I went from there to working in education, my first year out of college, and I've never like wanted to do anything else. I've always wanted to be in the mix. There's something just so special about being deeply connected with youth and, being deeply connected with groups of people who are all working towards something similar to improve like the lives of children.
Yes, that makes perfect sense to me. You're speaking to my heart right now.
Yay!
I love
Yeah.
that. So, our conference theme is Welcoming Wonder, Transforming Literacy Education with Inquiry and Imagination. And
Oh.
so, it's quite a mouthful.
Hmm.
But thinking about that word wonder, maybe as a child or even as an adult, what's something that you've always wondered about, or we're going to lead into like curiosity and imagination.
First of all, that conference title speaks to my heart. I think the wonderment of children is something that is so special, and that we as educators have real opportunities to nourish and protect and grow. And so I think it is so special that we're organizing a whole conference around, generating what that might look like for us and for children we teach. For me, when I think about wonder, uh, on an imaginative level, I always like wonder, how other people live and how other people experience the world. I have like a real general curiosity about, what are the different like foods people eat for breakfast around the world, or, what is it like to be a mother, in Nepal or Sri Lanka? Like I have real like deep empathy for people. And I also, I'm lucky to live in a space where there's just different kinds of people all the time circling around my life. And it has been really beautiful to just like listen to the stories of how other people live. And it is something I am generally like always curious about. And so I love traveling. I love like experiencing community with people who live differently than myself. And so that wonderment is really just, I'm just so curious about other humans who, live differently than me.
Oh, thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
So, we're going to shift into more questions about like your work. And
Mhm. Mhm.
you talk about joy as a form of resistance, and that's just
Yeah.
beautiful. What does that mean in a classroom where a teacher is exhausted and
Mhm.
maybe students are disengaged?
Yeah. Oh, I feel like you're talking about many, many classrooms right now. We were talking earlier, and here in New York City, school is still happening. People are really checked out, and fair enough, right? It's like sunny, it's
Mm-hmm.
beautiful. We just want to be outside. I think that part of joy as resistance comes underneath this umbrella on what it really means to teach fiercely. And so, if I were going to unpack what it means to teach fiercely, it really means to protect what we value as people, as a person, and ensure that we're doing what we can to make sure that is aligned with what we are doing in our classroom spaces. And so, I think about that as like a value system, the way we maintain our ethics and how we're making decisions in our classroom spaces. We want to make sure that we're aligning them to the things that we committed to when we first began teaching. And that is really difficult to do in many spaces where, teachers may be being told to do things that don't necessarily sit well with them, or, on the other side of the deep end of that spectrum, like are directly in misalignment with what they believe in. And right.
Uh,
And so, my press in this conversation in terms of like how to maintain joy is that it is really difficult sometimes. And I want to acknowledge that. But I think the smallest interactions are what we can lean into when we have a group of kids who are disengaged, when we have a teacher that is really tired, fair enough, very difficult work, right? I don't ever
Mm-hmm.
want to um, make teachers feel like, what? Like, I'm not working hard. You're
Right.
working very, very
Very
hard,
hard.
right? But I think when we pay attention to the micro interactions across our day, so that means like when kids are coming in our classroom, like how are we greeting them and how are they greeting us? Like really
Yes.
leaning into the classroom rituals that we have in place. Like those first 5 minutes of the day matter so much. And so my first recommendation is always to think about like, how are we beginning our days? What rituals do we have in place to really like just nourish that interaction with a
Mm.
sense of joy? And that sense of joy doesn't mean, you're not throwing a party necessarily. You're smiling and then acknowledging the child that like, I see you. And 9 times out of 10, the child is going to acknowledge you back and, you're going to feel seen as well. And then, the other rituals that you have in place, I think are really important too. We're not always able to choose what curriculum we're using. We're not always able to choose the exact book that we want to read. But the connections that we find with children, you can make just about any curriculum work if you're really establishing strong relationships and you have built in rituals, whether that be like a morning meeting at the beginning of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's when I was a fifth grade teacher, every single day of my classroom life, we ended our day in a classroom circle, like a closing circle. And so we appreciated one another. We had all different kinds of, questions and answers happening then. And there was just a real sense of community. So I think that for teachers who are having a hard time finding joy, it requires us to relocate the sources in which we are looking to build joy. And we have to locate joy in sources that we have control over. And so, one of the things that we can always control is our own behavior, right? And
Mm.
how we are using our energy to interact with the most important people in our work lives, which are the students who come to us in our classrooms.
Oh, wow. Mm. I love that thinking about like our source of joy, thinking about control, and knowing that sometimes it's just about a choice. And
Yeah.
even with the circumstances, like there are a lot of educators who are feeling a lot of things, and
Hmm.
joy is
Yeah.
not always at the top of the list. So I really
Hmm.
appreciate you saying that, sharing that with us.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Mm. Well, now we know that the Minor Collective was born from a belief that community changes everything. And
Yes.
could you share like who was in your community when you needed it most?
Oh my goodness. I often reflect on this question like, we sincerely believe community changes everything. It is at the core of our philosophy. It's a foundational part of our pedagogy. And I think one of the reasons the Minor Collective centers that ideology, Cornelius and myself, is that we began teaching in a place where community was very much a source of ideation. It was a
Mm.
source of support. It was a source of really being creative around so many different challenges that were happening. And so, and what's really special about that time period, we're talking about, 2005, 2006. And we were in a place where we had a leader in our building, the principal, who was a visionary. Like she was like we had like we were teaching in a 6 through 12 school, a secondary school, and I remember she was like, I want to have a really strong electives system. And so, generally speaking, you have your sixth, seventh, eighth grade, and then your ninth through 12th grade,
Mm-hmm.
but we taught, so teachers were invited to develop a syllabus for an elective that they wanted to teach. But what was special about her idea was that she wanted any kid from the school to be able to sign up for your elective. So we literally had classes with like 12-year-olds and 17-year-olds in the same space. And so when I think about, community changes everything, part of it is like you have like all of these different people on the team, right? You have the
Mm-hmm.
visionary, you have the nurturer, you have the person who knows how to like organize, right? And so, like, when you move as sort of like this you know, this one kind of like creature, like amoeba almost, right? You're so connected and everybody is pouring into, this idea that you're working towards making opportunities happen for kids. Everybody has like their own gift
Mm-hmm.
they're offering, and um you're not letting like the parameters of school inhibit what you could do or what might happen. Like there's a real belief that like things can be different if we're all working together. So those years were just so
Mm.
seminal for me in terms of how I am positioned or how I've continued to position myself in new communities that I'm a part of. It's listening, it's considering what my gifts are, what other people's gifts are, and figuring out, how do we put that puzzle together to, make this bigger machine kind of like go.
Oh, I appreciate that. Just always like to think about the superpowers that other people bring
Yes.
to the team. And
Yes.
once you identify those, then you're like, oh, this is not my gift. I can do it, but she can do this so much better and enjoy
Right.
it. She will enjoy
Yeah.
it. And that makes a difference. And then
Totally.
it just helps the work. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. And we don't have to be all the things. I think there's a lot of pressure to be excellent at all the things. And that's what makes us less excellent because we're trying to do too much.
Right? Just stressed out for no reason.
Right. Right.
Now, I've read that you say every adult can teach and every
Mm.
student can learn. Where did that conviction come from? And also, has it ever been tested?
A great question. Um, so this idea comes from, when you ask people, who is your favorite teacher? A lot of people some people are like, oh, Miss or Mr. So-and-so.
Mm-hmm.
But when you really challenge them a little bit, like, who did you learn from the most? Or who do you learn from? Like, the answers are usually people who are outside of school, which is really interesting, right?
Yes.
Because, unfortunately, like sometimes teaching is not always connected to learning. But when you ask people about learning specifically, it's
Mm-hmm.
always about learning, right? Or usually about learning. And so when I reflect on my own history and when I create like a lot of research
Mm-hmm.
and ask people about this question, you know, people teachers talk about who they learn from the most. It's a grandmother, it's an aunt, it's a sister, it's an uncle, it's a mother, it's a father. And so when you think about like every adult can teach, like we're all teachers, like everybody is a teacher, right? And
Yes.
so, if you think about like the skills that you learn, you use in your teaching life, it might be, for me, I think about sitting on the couch with my grandmother. And she was not a person who would say, step one, do this, step two, do this. Like she was very much a storyteller. And I remember she would crochet all the time. Like she would just blankets all over, gifting us a crochet blanket every year. But I was obsessed. Like I wanted to also know how to crochet. And I asked her to teach me and she really didn't respond. But then I would just spend time with her and I would observe her and I would watch her do, the motion. And then I remember like we went to Walgreens, and at the time, like Walgreens like sold crochet supplies. And I remember her buying me like an aluminum hook and she gave me some scraps of yarn and I would just spend time with her and I would watch her and I would observe. And she would just tell stories about nothing to do with crochet. Right. And so I think about that kind of learning experience. Like I felt safe. I felt
Yeah.
nurtured. I was given time. There wasn't a lot of pressure on me. And there was like some really beautiful, like other things that were happening in terms of her storytelling. Right. And so I learned, the fiber arts at a really, really young age. And I often think about how powerful those learning experiences are. Also, if you ask a lot of kids from an observational capacity who their favorite teachers are in school, they'll often talk about para educators or paraprofessionals or
Mm-hmm.
teaching assistants because they are connecting with children in a totally different way than teachers are, right? And
Yeah.
so when I say like everybody can teach and everybody can learn, that is very real. It's happening all around us. And, there's a lot of like professionalization that limits some of the teaching skills that are just baked within our hearts and souls. And so part of that sentiment, when I talk about, I believe everybody can teach, everybody can learn, it comes from this idea that we are all learners. It is the human condition. And so what is it that's happening in schools that is positioning some people, some students who feel like they're not good at learning, and some teachers to feel like they're not good at teaching?
Mm.
I think it is like this, it's been the quest of a lifetime, to peel back those layers. And I think we have a lot of opportunities to reposition that narrative. Like everybody can teach, everybody can learn. It's just, what are the buttons that we need to press in order to make that happen or a reality?
That's really, really interesting. And I too would have said my grandmother. Like,
Oh,
and then thinking about like what conditions or what was the environment like? And I love how you named those things. And you're like, these were all beneficial to great instruction, right? We don't think of it that way, but
yeah.
I think that's very powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Now,
there's so much research that supports that, right? Like there's our funds of knowledge, like Louise
hmm
Small's work, Gloria Ladson Billings' work. There's so many things that honor like our cultural dispositions and our practical wisdoms that we have baked within us. And then unfortunately, there's also a lot of research that shows like once people get in school, the more years they spend in school, like the less creative they
hmm
become. That's Sir Ken Robinson's research. And so I think that, we have a great amount of access to changing that narrative in schools to really honor kids and how they show up, and teachers too, how they show up. Like we know so much. Like let's find a place for our knowledge in school.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so Teaching Fiercely is a bold title. Could you
Yes.
share more about it and what it means to teach fiercely and what does it not mean?
Oh, that's thanks. You are great at writing questions. So teaching fiercely is essentially modeled after when I was thinking about pedagogy that changes the narrative on how school goes, that has a transformative capacity in people's work. I was really thinking about the essential role of mothers and grandmothers in people's lives, how much we
Mm,
learn from them, how sometimes they're not always acknowledged as people that are important in our learning lives, even though they're perhaps some of the most essential people worldwide. So I actually thought about the term mama bear, right? So, when you have a mother or a woman who's protecting kids, like, they'll talk about, oh, she's being a mama bear. But so here's the thing about mother bears. Okay. They're very fierce, right? They're like an
mhm,
apex predator, but they also seek and create safe and nurturing environments for their cubs. And they intentionally play with their cubs to activate powerful social skills and like life skills, like hunting and resting and all of those things. And so the term ferocity really came from, thinking about a mother bear and how she works
mm,
with cubs is very much how many teachers, when they're really engaging in fierce pedagogy, they're doing similar work. They're ensuring that kids are entering their classroom space. Their classroom space is safe and it is nourishing. We know that without safety and without nurture, kids have people have a
yes.
very, very difficult time learning, right? So that's the foundation. And then you're also actively and intentionally creating opportunities for kids to learn the skills they need, not only to survive. So we're not talking about the bottom, right? Like,
Mm-mm,
yes, we have to survive, but also like to actively like play with one another, to experience joy, to want to learn more, to be excited about learning more. And I think perhaps most important is, a fierce teacher is somebody who maintains their commitment. When they first enter the profession, their teacher why, that commitment, to children, to, activating joy, to, whatever it might be, that calling you might feel. And they're figuring out it's a lot of learning. We are never done. We are like unfinished people always
mhm,
in this work. It is an active commitment to also figuring out like what do I need to navigate socially or institutionally to figure out like how I can maintain this commitment. That is like a really active part of fierce pedagogy. And I do believe, I know it is incredibly challenging, to do that work when a teacher's cognitive load, like baseline cognitive load, is already like at the max.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, Markesha, it goes back to that idea of community. Like we have to do this work in community in connection with other people who are also actively pursuing what it means to, be excited to go to work,
I
right?
know, right?
Like we have to do this together. It is not something that I think people will find success in trying to accomplish alone.
Mm. So many good ideas. And I love the mama bear analogy. I did not see that coming. And I'm so glad I asked that question.
Yeah, so it's a lot easier, right? Like when we have and kids, this analogy, right? Like what is the
Mm-hmm.
schema that we can draw from? Because I think when you see it now, like you'll be like identifying like
Yes.
classrooms that you've been in, or you've been thinking about, like even in your own work. You're like, oh yes, like that reflects who I am or what I'm trying to do.
Yes. I love that. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So my last question is like an elevator pitch, Cass,
Mm.
there are people who are thinking, I might want to attend the TCTELA conference this year. And if a Texas educator is on the fence about attending your session, maybe they didn't get to watch this episode and get to learn about your ideas and about your passion. What's the one thing you'd want them to know before they decide to attend your session?
I so everybody come to my session. First of all, one of my community is the center, right? But the sister to community is fun. We will definitely have a lot of fun. And the reason for that is because one of the most important ways we engage our commitment to this work is by ensuring that we are having fun while we are doing it. So we're going to reconnect with who we are as an individual, who we are as a people, why we are in teaching, and we are going to strategize on how we make sure that continues to happen when we show up to work on the next Tuesday we have to go to school. I promise you, we will have a really great time. We'll talk about some deeply engaging conversations regarding literacy, regarding children, and most of all, like regarding us to make sure that, you feel really good about the choices you're making in your classroom, and that when it's time to go to bed at night, you can rest your head on your pillow and sleep well, knowing that you did the work that you signed up to do. So I cannot wait to be with y'all in Texas. Thank you
Oh.
so much, Markesha, for inviting me to come.
Well, that is awesome. And it is very persuasive. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for what you bring to this work that we all get to do together. I'm so excited to share space with you and to have our
Yay, me
conference
too.
attendees share space with you. It's going to be a fantastic day.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And I cannot wait to work with you all.
Thank you so much to Kass Minor for this conversation, and thank you for listening to Wonder and Words. If this episode moved you, share it with a colleague who needs to hear it. Cass will be speaking at the TCTELA 62nd Annual Conference and Exposition. I hope we'll see you there. Registration is open at tctela.org. New episodes drop every other Wednesday, and until next time, keep wondering, keep learning.